Today, in support of the right to bear arms, we'll be talking about the Druid class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who wonders why druids would ever bother becoming adventurers when they have the option of selling dinosaur rides to children's birthday parties. You know, on second thought, the Dragon's Lair is probably the safer option. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we are continuing my classic introduction series where we're going to be talking about the Druid in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is a series where we take a broad overview of different classes in RPGs and ask what they offer players at the gaming table. In specific, we examine each class through the lens of 5 questions. What is the Druid? What are the strengths of the Druid? What are the weaknesses of the Druid? What build options does the Druid give me? And how can I get the most out of the Druid in play? Now, I will say up front that I really love what Paizo did with the Druid in Pathfinder 2e, and there is a lot of fun stuff inside of this class. So let's dig in to the exciting and powerful primal spellcasters known as the Druids in Pathfinder 2e. So our very first question today is, what is the Druid class? This is essentially a discussion of the role that the Druid class plays in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And we break this conversation down into a few subcategories. First, we talk about the actual role of the Druid class according to Pathfinder's game mechanics. Then I give my thoughts about the overall complexity of the Druid in play. And finally, I talk about some of the key terms that you want to be familiar with if you choose to play a Druid. Now, in terms of the Druid's role in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the game terminology that you would use is the Druid is a prepared primal spellcaster. Now, spellcaster is a pretty obvious term. We all have a pretty good idea of what that means. The role of the class is to sling spells and manipulate the battlefield through magic. But what about those other two terms, prepared and primal? Well, in Pathfinder 2e, you can break down spellcasters a variety of different ways. One of those ways is into prepared and spontaneous casters. Now, so far in this series, we have only discussed prepared spellcasters, and we're going to do that again today. A prepared spellcaster is a caster that at the start of the day sits down and decides which specific spells they want to have access to. The Druid will have so many spell slots available, and they take the time to decide which spell goes into each of those spell slots. This gives the Druid a lot of flexibility at the start of the day, but then once those spell slots are assigned, they don't really have any flexibility about switching them around. As for the term primal, that's a reference to the Druid's spellcasting tradition. There are 4 spellcasting traditions in Pathfinder 2e. The classic Arcane and Divine traditions, and then 2 new traditions, Occult and Primal. In game terminology, each of the 4 traditions covers 2 different essences of magic. In the case of Primal Magic, it covers what's known as Life or Vital Essence and Matter Essence. Primal Magic is all about affecting the world around you, healing your allies, summoning a creature to your side, or shape-changing into a bear for combat. Primal Magic is bound very tightly to the world around you and is very good at manipulating the physical aspects of the battlefield. For those of you who are curious, yes, the Druids are blaster casters now, and it's a lot of fun. So when you take those three terms together, prepared, primal, spellcaster, you get an idea of what the Druid's role is intended to be. You're a spellcaster who is focused on physically affecting the battlefield, either through heals or damaging spells or through calling creatures to your aid. The primal spellcasting tradition packs a lot of punch, and the Druid is the standard bearer for this amazing new tradition in the game. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the complexity of the Druid. And I like to say in these videos, please never let the complexity rating of a class scare you away from playing a class. Over the years of gaming, I have learned that player excitement and interest weighs so much heavier than the actual mechanical complexity of playing a character. If you think that Druid sounds amazing, your interest is going to overcome any complexity that you might encounter, so please don't let a complexity score scare you. That being said, I do think that Druid is one of the more complex classes in Pathfinder 2e, in particular because of the way their subclasses work, so expect a little bit more detail when we get to section 4 of this video. Overall, I give the Druid a complexity rating of 8 out of 10. This is a class that is going to have some nuance and is going to need some technical skill to get the most out of it. Now, the last thing in this section is key terms. One of the things I really like about the core rulebook for Pathfinder 2e is Paizo gives us a key term sidebar for every single class in the game. They tell you what sort of terms you need to be familiar with should you choose to play a particular class, and the Druid sidebar is found on page 133 and comes with only one keyword, which is metamagic. Now, if you've seen any of the other caster videos, this is a keyword that we have dealt with before. Metamagic actions are special actions you can take to modify a spell that you are about to cast. You spend an action to use your metamagic ability, and then you immediately follow that up with one of your spells. Then, when the spell goes off, it is modified, enhanced, or changed in some fashion by the metamagic feat that you chose to use. This is a common keyword for any spellcasting class. Now, I do appreciate the fact that Paizo gives us those sidebars, but if you've seen this series, you know that I have a complaint in that I feel like Paizo frequently leaves key terms off of these sidebars, and that is definitely the case for Druids. One key term that you're going to need to be familiar with is the anathema key term. As a Druid, you have certain restrictions on your behavior because of your code as a Druid. It's not nearly as complex as the cleric or the champion, but it is there and you want to be familiar with them. Additionally, as a Druid, you're going to have some key terms that you're going to want to know that are going to relate to your spellcasting. And those key terms are minion, morph, and polymorph. Minion will affect your summoning spells and also your animal companion if you have one. And morph and polymorph are going to tie into a lot of the magic you can use. Animal companion rules are found on page 214 of the core rulebook. And rules for minion, morph, and polymorph can be found in a magic sidebar on page 301. So I definitely recommend checking those pages out and reading up on those concepts just a little bit more so that you'll be familiar with them in play. So that's an overview of what the Druid class is. Let's move on to the strengths of the Druid class. So, what are the strengths of the Druid in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Well, a Druid in play kind of feels like that green deck that you're playing against on Magic the Gathering Arena, where they just get to do whatever they want, and when you get frustrated and ask them how that's possible, they just kind of throw the word nature at you and then continue being ridiculous. Druids have access to so many incredible options in Pathfinder 2e, and they are a lot of fun to play. I remember the first moment that I realized what Paizo had done with Druids in Pathfinder 2e. I was looking through the Primal spell list and kind of checking out the different options in the core rulebook, and I went looking for the classic Druid spell from previous editions called Call Lightning. And I couldn't find it. This really threw me off because in previous editions that was one of the main Druid attack spells, and I spent several minutes flipping back and forth and trying to figure out what was going on. Why would Paizo leave out such a classic attack spell for the Druid? And then I noticed something. The Druid didn't need Call Lightning anymore because it got replaced with the spell Lightning Bolt. Yes, Druids are blaster casters now. When you take a look at Druid magic in Pathfinder 2e, you will notice that it is all about impacting the battlefield. Whether you're talking about healing an ally, whether you're talking about summoning a lightning bolt to blast your foes, whether you are calling a creature to aid you in battle, or whether you are literally transforming yourself into a bear or a wolf or something even crazier than that so that you can maul a bandit, Druid magic is all about the real tangible world and affecting that world in crazy and powerful ways. If you examine the Druid spell list, you will notice that their spells are drawn primarily from the Evocation, Necromancy, Conjuration, and Transmutation schools. And while there's a lot of diversity in those schools of magic, the through line of those schools is often the real physical impact those spells will have. Necromancy spells can heal an ally or harm an enemy. Conjuration spells can summon all types of creatures to aid you in battle. Evocation spells definitely impact the battlefield, usually in an explosive fashion. And then Transmutation is literally the school of change, in your case, usually changing into a bear so you can eat someone. Druid magic is focused on the world around them and impacting that world, and especially the battlefield, in real, tangible, and powerful ways. The Druid spell list, I am not joking, is probably one of the most fun spell lists in the game. But there is more to the Druid than just their spell casting. Druids are actually one of the most versatile of the casting classes. They actually have a lot of options at their disposal. Now, some of that is the diversity in spell casting that I pointed out earlier. That can cover a lot of what I'm discussing here. But Druids come with a reasonable amount of HP compared to some other casters. They actually start the game with light and medium armor proficiency. There are some restrictions there, but they get to use armor, and they actually start with the shield block ability as well. Druids have options in physical combat. They have options with magic. Druids have a number of different things that they can do. There's even a Druid build available that makes for a reasonably good, if nature-focused diplomat for your party. It would have been easy for Paizo to pigeonhole the Druid down into one very narrow definition of what the class can be, but if you actually look at the options for the Druid in Pathfinder 2e, it is a truly versatile class, and that is something that I really enjoy about them. And on top of that, the last strength that I want to discuss is something of a surprise given the point that I just made. Druids are a very versatile class, but they are not what I would call a multiple attribute dependent or MAD class. We've seen for other classes that are very versatile, such as the Rogue or the War Priest Cleric, that the need for a number of different attributes can actually be frustrating in play. Oftentimes when you have versatile characters, they end up trying to go so many different directions that it can be frustrating to support everything that they're capable of doing, but really for the Druids that's not the case. The Druid is designed in such a way that they need a high wisdom, and they probably want a good constitution score, but from there they have a lot of flexibility about what they actually are going to do with their attributes. It's refreshing to see a class that can fill a variety of roles while not being frustrated by that class demanding so many good attributes that they become difficult to play. It's a small nuance in the Druid's design, but it is something I really appreciate. So now that we've talked about the Druid's strengths, let's ask the question, what are the weaknesses of the Druid class? Well, since we started with spellcasting in the last section, I guess we need to talk about spellcasting again here. If there is an obvious strength to Druid spellcasting in the physical impact on the real world around them, there is also an obvious gap when it comes to Druid spellcasting, which I call the mind games gap. Druids don't get nearly as many spells from the illusion, enchantment, or divination schools. This translates to a spell list that is not very good at attacking the will saves of their targets. And if you think about the role that a druid is expected to play as sort of a master of nature, beasts, animals, they often don't have very good will saves. So it's kind of strange to see a class that would frequently deal with creatures with weak will saves that doesn't have many ways to attack those will saves. Druids just aren't very good at anything ephemeral, spiritual, or otherwise mental, and that means that you can't really rely on them in situations where mind games are of the essence. Another significant issue that I have with the Druid class in Pathfinder 2e is Druids are very weak in the skills department. In fact, they may actually be my pick for the weakest in the skills department in Pathfinder 2e, mostly because of their starting skills. Druids begin play trained with the nature skill and one other skill from their subclass, plus the usual 2+ intelligence modifier skill picks that any other class would get. This seems normal, and at first glance you might not think much about it, but there is an obvious gap here. Druids are trained in nature, but not survival. I do not understand why Paizo did this. Druids are supposed to be masters of the wild, so it seems like the survival skills should be an auto-trained skill for the class. I mean, the Wild Order subclass that we're going to talk about later, their anathema literally says you must not rely on civilization to survive, so a Wild Order Druid needs the survival skill to fill the requirements of their class, and yet they don't have the survival skill as an automatic trained skill. This is truly weird, and ultimately what it means is the Druid is kind of forced to spend one of their free picks on the survival skill. Now I realize that you may be saying, in Pathfinder 2e, survival is sort of your woodscrafty skill, it's about finding resources in the wild and stuff like that, and nature is the skill for handling animals and for using primal magic. And you're correct, there is that division between the two skills, but I want to point out that the Ranger in Pathfinder 2e starts play with survival and nature both trained. And the Ranger is not a spellcasting class in core Pathfinder 2e. So if the Ranger starts play with both skills, I do not understand why the Druid does not. Druids don't get a lot of trained skills, they're missing an obvious trained skill, and there's a real possibility that intelligence is one of the attributes that the Druid decided to dump during character creation. All of this combined leads to a class that feels really weak in the skill department. Now, the last weakness that I want to talk about on the Druid is a little bit hard to quantify, and I feel like I'm going to sound like Qui-Gon Jinn when I say this, but the only way I really know how to explain it is what I call the bigger fish problem. Now, one of the cool things about the Druid, if you were paying attention to the strengths earlier, is that the class is very versatile. They come with a wider range of spells that are good in all kinds of physical, tangible situations. And they have access to weapons and armor, sure, some restrictions, but they can actually wade into combat and be a little more survivable than most other spellcasting classes, with the only real exception being the War Priest. The Druid comes into this game with such a diverse array of options that it feels really good in play. And you kind of miss the fact that a lot of Druid stuff caps at expert proficiency. There are some Druid things that can go up to Master or Legendary proficiency, but by and large, this wide array of things that the Druid can do many of those things are limited to expert proficiency overall. And that can lead to this weird psychological situation where you feel a lot bigger than you really are. But, as Qui-Gon Jinn once said, there's always a bigger fish. And Druid is a class where if you aren't careful in play, you could very easily bite off more than you can chew and wind up in a situation where you're trying to tackle something that is way too dangerous to tackle alone. So I do want to encourage you, if you're playing the Druid, do be mindful that while you do have an impressive array of options, that some of those options are not going to be as powerful long run as they might initially appear. Look out for those bigger fish. So with all of that in mind, now it's time to talk about the build options that the Druid has in play. Quick caveat, this video is being recorded before the release of the Secrets of Magic book, and Paizo has mentioned that there are going to be some more options for Druid in that book. Right now, I am only covering the 4 subclasses that are available in the core rulebook. When Secrets of Magic comes out, I'm probably going to have several videos on a lot of topics from that book, but since I don't have that information now, I can't really talk about those options here. For now, the core rulebook offers us 4 subclasses for the Druid. They are 4 orders that represent the different possible natural focuses that you might have as a Druid. They are Animal, Plant, Storm, and Wild. Each of these orders is going to give you a bonus trained class skill, access to a Druid class feat, and a focus spell of some kind. There will be some variation between these orders in terms of the number of focus points you have, but we'll talk about that as we go through these different orders. The first order is the Animal Order, and this is the Combat Pet subclass for the Druid. If you want to have a pet and you want to bring that pet with you into combat, the Animal Order is the order for you. You will start the game with 1 focus point. You will have the Athletics skill as a trained skill. You will gain the Animal Companion class feat, and you will gain access to the Heal Animal focus spell. Now, I don't have time to dive deep into everything that you can do with an Animal Companion. Similar to the Ranger class, that would just take up way too much time here, but I have heard several people say they are interested in an Animal Companion video, so I am in the process of scripting that for the Ranger, Champion, and Druid. I'm going to try to do one video that kind of covers Animal Companions as an option for all 3 classes, so be on the lookout for that. Next up, I want to talk about the Storm Order for the Druid. This is your Blaster Caster order. If you want to play a Druid that is all about just dropping the wrath of nature onto the battlefield, this is definitely the order you want to go for. You will actually begin play with an extra focus point, meaning that this is one of the few character options in 2E where you can actually have 2 focus points at the very start of the game. You will gain Acrobatics as a trained skill, and you will have access to the Stormborn Druid class feat, which mostly eliminates a lot of penalties for different natural weather phenomenon that might be affecting a battlefield. So rain, fog, those kind of things, they don't bother you. Finally, you will gain access to the Tempest Surge focus spell. All of these things combine into a subclass that is all about dropping an incredible amount of powerful spells onto the battlefield and just blasting your foes with the wrath of nature. This is a very fun subclass. But as fun as the Storm Order is, the next order is my personal favorite when it comes to the Druid. The Wild Order subclass for the Druid is the subclass that is all about your wild shape. One of the classic tropes of the Druid in fantasy RPGs is their ability to turn into different types of animals and then wade into combat as a wolf or a bear or even more powerful creatures like a dinosaur. And the Wild Order Druid is definitely the order if you want to play that kind of character. Really quick, this subclass will give you training in the Intimidation skill, as well as the Wild Morph focus spell. You will also gain the Wild Shape class feat, which will give you another focus spell called Wild Shape. And I'll go ahead and tell you that focus spell, Wild Shape, is a little bit of a complex beast. This subclass is part of the reason I give the Druid a complexity rating of 8 out of 10 overall, because there is just a lot going on with Wild Shape, I do encourage you, read this focus spell closely, read the feats that are associated with it closely. There is a lot going on here. The basics of Wild Shape are, it's a focus spell, so you can spend a focus point to use it during combat, and it begins with the effects of the Pest Form spell. However, as you level up in the Druid class, you can take other Druid class feats to add other options to your Wild Shape. So you might take Animal Form, or you might take Dinosaur Form later on. You might even take Monstrosity Form towards the end of the game. As you level up, you will take feats to add options to your Wild Shape, thus giving that one focus spell a variety of different options in combat. The flexibility on this is amazing. The variety of options that you can get is almost absurd. This really is a focus spell you can get a ton of mileage out of. But I do want to point out, with the Wild Order subclass for Druids, you have the Wild Morph focus spell, you have the Wild Shape focus spell with a bunch of different options, and you only have one focus point, which means that for the majority of your build, you're only going to be able to use a single focus spell in any given combat. I've seen a lot of recommendations online that if you want to play a Wild Order Druid, that it's worth taking the Order Explorer feat, so you can pick up some focus spells from other orders, and through that pick up some focus points from other orders as well. And that could be a good idea, because the Wild Order, while it has tons of Wild Shape options, you are kind of limited to using Wild Shape once per combat. So keep that in mind. There is some complexity to this subclass, but just the variety of things you can turn into and the amount of chaos you can cause with all of these Wild Shapes, it's a lot of fun. So complexity aside, the Wild Order is still my favorite subclass for Druid. Now, you may have noticed that I skipped over one of the subclasses earlier, and that's the Plant Order subclass for the Druid. And the reason that I skipped over it is because it's a little bit weird compared to the other subclasses. The Animal Order, the Storm Order, the Wild Order, they are very focused in terms of the main thing that you want to do with that particular subclass. The Plant Order, well, they're a lot more varied. This subclass will give you training with the Diplomacy skill, and will give you the Leshy Familiar class feat, and finally you will pick up the Goodberry Focus spell. It's also worth noting that the Plant Order is another Druid order that will begin the game with 2 focus points instead of 1. So, what is the Plant Order as a subclass? Well, Familiars in Pathfinder 2e are not meant to be combatants, so the Leshy Familiar is not going to fill a combat role like you might expect an animal companion to fill. It's more of a support style companion, and the Diplomacy skill is kind of a face skill, if anything. And then when you look at the Goodberry spell, that's actually kind of a healing spell. So what is the Plant Order for the Druid? I'll go ahead and tell you, it's not super clear. In fact, when you get to some of the later stuff that the Plant Order can do, you get crazy attack spells like Impaling Briars. The Plant Order is a little all over the place compared to the other Druid subclasses, so this is my personal opinion. I feel like the Plant Order subclass for the Druid is the versatile subclass. If you really want to lean into the versatile nature of the Druid, where you can do a lot of different things and where you have a real variety of options in play, that's what I feel like the Plant Order is intended to be. You have some specialized healing. You have some options as the face for the party. You have a support minion. You have a few unique attack spells. But if you view the Druid as a versatile class, then the Plant Order is the order that kind of leans into that versatility. So don't go into the Plant Order feeling like, oh, this is the healer version, or oh, this is the face version, but rather see it as an exploration of the variety of options available to the Druid. Anyways, that's my personal opinion. I realize other people may have different takes. So those are the different subclasses for the Druid. Let's move on to getting the most out of the Druid class. Alright, so we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to the Druid class, so now we need to ask, how can I get the most out of the Druid class in play? And let's start at a topic that we've hit several times throughout this video, which is Druids are spellcasters. I think that the number one thing that you need to keep in mind if you want to play a Druid well is you need to remember the core of your character is you are a spellcasting class. Yes, Druids have a lot of versatility compared to other spellcasters, and that versatility is one of the things I love about the Druid class. But when we talked about that bigger fish problem, do remember a lot of your versatility caps at expert. The thing that actually pushes to legendary for you is your spellcasting. And that means as a druid, if you really want to get the mileage out of the class, you want to make sure you are taking your spellcasting seriously. Even if you're playing something like a Wild Order druid who wants to wild shape into a T-Rex and stomp their way into battle, it's wise to remember that using your spells well and timing your spells well is going to be key to your success. We pointed out when we looked at the Wild Order Druid that you only get one wild shape per battle by the base progression. So that means timing that wild shape and using that wild shape well is going to be critical in getting the most out of the class. Spellcasting is your bread and butter. Yes, you have options. Yes, you want to keep those options in mind, but never let the variety of options distract you from the fact that spellcasting is the core of your character. So with that in mind, the next thing that I want to talk about is survival of the fittest. You're a druid, we had to get some nature puns in this video somewhere. Nature can be cruel, nature can be harsh, and as I said earlier, there is always a bigger fish. You are a spellcaster, and as a spellcaster, that means you're not as durable as martial classes in play. Even if you wild shape into a bear, you're not going to have the same durability that a champion or a fighter would have going into melee combat, and as a druid, it's important to keep that in mind. I strongly recommend when you are making choices for your druid, look for things that are going to make you more durable. Wisdom may be your core ability, but Constitution is a strong second for druids because extra hit points is always a good thing. Also, anything that can improve your saves or improve other survivability aspects of your character, those are going to be good investments for you. You don't have the raw durability of a barbarian, but if you invest the right ancestry feats or search out the right items for your character, that can go a long way in helping your character become fit to survive whatever encounters they may have. Finally, let's talk about teamwork. Or, I guess since you're a druid, let's talk about pack tactics. One of the dangers of versatile classes is it's very easy to fall into a lone wolf mentality. And the thing about a lone wolf is, it's a well-known literary and media archetype that just doesn't play out in nature. A lone wolf in nature is probably a wolf that's going to die. You need your pack. You need your team. Working well with your party and working well with the group that you have called around yourself is critical to your overall survival. And a good example of this is honestly your skill list. Your skill list, as we talked about in the weaknesses section, is going to be pretty weak compared to the other characters in your team. And that's one of the reasons that you're going to need to work well with your other teammates if you want to be able to overcome the variety of challenges you will encounter. So when you look at your class feats, when you look at your spell selection, when you look at the tactics you want to use in play, don't just think about the options that you have, but think about how those options are going to interact with the other people on your team. The good news is, you have access to a lot of very powerful spells that can shape the battlefield to your advantage and can also shape the battlefield to the advantage of your team. So as a druid, I encourage you, hunt with your pack, and if you want to take down that bigger fish I warned you about, the best way to do it is with your pack mates by your side. Those are my thoughts on the Druid class. The Druid is a lot of fun. Paizo has infused a lot of flavor into the options that the Druid has, and you can take your Druid in so many different directions. Druid truly is one of my favorite classes in Pathfinder. There is a lot of great stuff that you can dig into with this class. But let me turn the conversation over to you. Do you agree with my analysis of the Druid class? Are there strengths of the Druid that I overlooked? Or are there weaknesses of the Druid that I failed to mention? What are some of your favorite build choices that the Druid has access to? And what advice would you give someone hoping to get the most out of the Druid class in play? Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to the channel. Be a part of the ongoing conversation that we're having here. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.